Greetings, citizens of the world.
This is Virtual Verity.
We are anonymous.
It has cameras and sensors.
It's a podcast.
Its products can help hack the phone of a political activist, a journalist, or even a prince.
The NSO Group is an Israeli cyber surveillance company.
They allege that malicious Pegasus surveillance software was used to infiltrate their iPhones and track their communications and movements.
They don't make vaccines. The only thing they sell is the virus. I think saying that they only sell this to government doesn't make that better.
When you look at who the targets are.
I'm Mark Bruno, a cybersecurity and conflict analyst. This is Virtual Verity, where I discuss topics at the nexus of technology, InfoSec, open source intelligence, and modern conflict. In late February 2024, Israeli software firm NSO Group was ordered by a U.S. District Court to disclose the source code of its product, the infamous Pegasus Spyware, to the Meta Corporation. The trial, which began in 2019, focused on how its product was used to spy on 1,400 WhatsApp users, including journalists, political dissidents, and various activists. While Meta, as a company, is no saint when it comes to the mistreatment of customer data, this particular event has been seen as a small victory against the cryptic world of the spyware industry and how its products are used by state and non-state actors against regular citizens exercising their rights. On a personal note, I hate Meta. I really hate Meta. I think they're awful, and at least one of the stories I'll be covering today is about their own misdeeds regarding privacy and surveillance. However, it's been just a few weeks, and this incident is already being forgotten. In part, it's because of the nature of the cybersecurity and cyber warfare news cycle. There's always something, some new vulnerability, something impacting billions of customers around the world, and the information just travels quickly. I have my own agenda. Spyware, stalkerware, hack for hire. I want this whole shady segment of the cybersecurity space under constant scrutiny. I don't want people to forget that it is a regular practice within ostensibly democratic countries to surveil, defame, and even target dissenters for arrest and assassination using these methods. Countries that are considered allies to the US, NATO, and other constructed good guy factions deploy these types of deniable assets, shady contractors, and overall evil people who try to commodify our data and online activity in some ways that are even darker than the most well-known tech giants. And before we got into that, I just wanted to cover some of the more recent relevant news stories. So this first one is talking about how there's been significant GPS jamming and spoofing over the Baltic Sea in Poland since the start of the year, but with a huge uptick since the beginning of March. This is definitely not coincidental, or I think this is deliberately electronic warfare being used on NATO assets. So the type of interference that this is messes with the GPS signal on a plane, tells it that it is not where it actually is in the sky, which, as you can imagine, is potentially very dangerous, though most skilled pilots are able to notice it and correct for it. A lot of times this is kind of like a shot across the bow when this is used in electronic warfare. This is the kind of thing, it's been happening repeatedly in this region since the 2014 annexation of Crimea. The important thing to note is just how much this activity's increased. Recent reports said that over 1,600 aircraft were impacted from the middle of March, and those numbers were released on March 24th, so if that is true, it's only gotten bigger. Also directly affected by this was the UK's defense secretary on his way back from Poland 2 weekends ago. His RAF Dassault Falcon 900 had its GPS jammed for a significant amount of time. It's important to note that there are a number of NATO exercises that take place in this particular region because it's the area near the Suwalki Gap, a part of Poland that NATO typically war games as one of the first flashpoints in a hypothetical land engagement against Russia. Especially since February 2022, there's been a massive buildup of US and other NATO troops here, and the GPS spoofing and jamming is just one of the many acknowledgements that Russian forces based out of Kaliningrad, which is just north of Poland or part of northern Poland, depending on how you look at it, and essentially them acknowledging that they see the forces building there. Most analysts seem to agree that the source of the jamming is somewhere on the Russian base in Kaliningrad, and I don't mean to downplay it as if this is not some sort of immediate threat to aviation in the region. It definitely is, but what I want to communicate is that this is nothing new as far as the escalations that have started since Russia did its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Two ransomware gangs are trying to collect from the Peruvian army, of all places. Since the night of March 24th, RansomX ransomware gang has claimed to have stolen nearly 800 gigs of data from the Peruvian Ministry of Defense. And the next day, INC ransomware claimed to have also successfully attacked the ministry, specifically the army. Their claim was that they had taken about 500 gigs of data. Previously leaked information seemed to confirm that both groups have come into possession of PII and that they do seem to come from a similar data set, though they were both smart enough to not display any duplicates. So, I mean, if RansomX was the original threat actor responsible for the initial attack, it'd be their first one carried out in nearly 4 months. The last one they claimed was a successful ransom against Kenya Airways in December. This one's a little weird because it's not common for ransomware gangs, especially ones that have no suspected state backing like Conti did, to go after military entities, which had me a bit skeptical at first. It's also interesting that I haven't found anything in Peruvian news about it. The only thing I could actually find were some Latin American and South American InfoSec Twitter accounts writing about it, but I have yet to see like any full articles about the incidents or any investigations started. This one's incredibly upsetting. On March 30th, the day I'm recording this, the Indian Embassy in Cambodia released a statement that it had assisted in rescuing and repatriating 250 Indian nationals who were victims of human trafficking and forced into service for cybercriminal and fraud activity. Let's say a rare human rights W for India these days. The rescue is part of a broader initiative by the Indian government to rescue over 5,000 citizens who were lured to Cambodia for the hope of good paying IT jobs. When they showed up, they were forced into cybercrime and fraud operations that were targeted back at India. As I think I have said on every episode so far, is this is part of a huge story that I want to get more in depth on another episode, but it is part of a much deeper problem within the cybercriminal space. It does make you wonder how many entities actually are staffed by forced labor. In September 2023, the UN released a report on cyber scam operations having ties to human trafficking in Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia, the Philippines, and Malaysia, and that this was a uniform rise in operations all over Southeast Asia. That same month, an operation by Interpol led to nearly 300 arrests for human trafficking and other crimes across 27 countries. And these investigations showed that the victims were lured with job promises as well in the same region and forced into digital fraud schemes. Interpol issued an orange notice due to the threat severity and how much it was spreading. The UNODC Office for Drugs and Crime report specifically mentions that this activity is happening in areas of special economic zones. In Cambodia's context, these areas are largely administered by private companies, both from Cambodia, but also business entities from China. And this last one I saw on TechCrunch on the 26th of March, Facebook snooping on user Snapchat traffic. I'm not sure if this counts as slander, but this sounds a lot like corporate espionage. And not to beat the drum too hard, but the people most directly affected were, hey, regular users like us. So in 2016, Facebook launched Project Ghostbusters to intercept and decrypt network traffic between Snapchat users and servers. The project aimed to understand user behavior because if you don't really like, Snapchat competes with Meta's products. Documents revealed as part of a class action lawsuit between consumers and Meta exposed the project. Facebook tried to gain a competitive edge by analyzing user interactions with competitors like Snapchat, Amazon, and YouTube. Snapchat's encrypted traffic posed a challenge, leading Facebook to develop a special technology, which makes sense because Snapchat, for you youngins out there, the original point of Snapchat was to have messages that would only be readable once or twice and that would go away forever, so you could have a private conversation, which is antithetical to a lot of the data economy. But hey, Snapchat's still around. I'm not going to sing their praises, but in this one instance, this was something that made them way better than Meta. Okay, sidebar over. Facebook engineers proposed using Anavo, a VPN-like service acquired in 2013 by the company to intercept the traffic. When Anavo would be activated on a device, it could read network traffic before encryption, enabling detailed in-app activity analysis. Facebook expanded the program to Amazon and YouTube later. Internally, there was disagreement. Concerns were raised by some Facebook employees about the privacy and security implications, which they should have been. In 2020, a class action lawsuit against Facebook alleged deceptive data collection and exploitation of user data. This specific lawsuit is where these documents were produced. Yeah, I just wanted to get that last story out there, not just because it was important, but also on the off chance this episode leaves you with some kind of warm and fuzzy over Meta. Just remember that this is very much a case of
Let them fight.
the lawsuit between NSO Group and Meta is still a big deal. I can't claim that this will be the best one-stop shop of a podcast episode about the topic, but I do hope it'll effectively get you up to speed if you're not already. There's some great ones you should go listen to. Right off the top of my head, there's an episode of the Reveal podcast. They largely focus on one of the incidents I'll be referring to here, Pegasus' use against an El Salvador-based news organization. Pegasus has been the subject of so much incredible research already. Organizations such as Citizen Lab, Amnesty International, Reporters Without Borders, and Access Now are all among the numerous watchdogs who've kept it in their sights. This explainer is going to largely rely on distilling work from these groups, as well as Group IB and Kaspersky, and a few others for the more technical details. I'll do my best to introduce the spyware itself, including why you should care about it, what it's capable of, and a bit of its history. Without getting too into the technical weeds, I'll talk about how it works, some general countermeasures, and hopefully do a little more diving into the court case between Meta and NSO Group. Again, let me be clear, I will not get to cover every single thing about Pegasus. There's just been so much horrible stuff associated with this that I'm just not going to get to all of it, not in the 30-ish minutes I'll have you here. Pegasus is a powerful piece of what's been called mercenary spyware. I think we all know what spyware is broadly, but it's capable of far more insidious and deep surveillance than what probably comes to mind. Its capabilities for deep surveillance enable unauthorized access to a target's mobile device data, which includes calls, messages, and location. Research into some of the events we'll cover shortly indicates it's also capable of having access to a user's camera and microphone. It's been on the market since at least 2012, with indications of its development beginning in 2010. The Israeli government classifies it as a cyber weapon, which means that every contract requires express permission by them, or you could say by extension, is partly responsible for some of the incidents that have resulted from the use of Pegasus. This is where the mercenary bit comes in. Any organization, typically governments, though what types of governments you'll see momentarily, pay for the service, have the infrastructure built, and pick their targets. At its earliest inception, it doesn't seem like NSO Group was meant to be an insidious entity, developing support infrastructure for mobile devices under the name Communitake. The company established itself in 2010. However, it seems to have taken just over a year for it to go from such an innocent launch to having their first iteration of the Pegasus spyware completed before 2011. NSO Group operates as a subsidiary of a company called Q Cyber Technologies. They have a number of affiliates, and if you're curious, yes, there is a US branch. It's called Westbridge Technologies, and they market the subtly named Phantom, which is essentially the North American version of Pegasus. There's a lot of literature about the FBI's relationship with Westbridge, despite the government saying that NSO Group's interests don't align those of the US government. But I guess that's probably another story. In a wonderfully unproblematic move, the company was sold to a British capital investment firm for a cool $1 billion. While this attracted some controversy at the time, it clearly didn't slow anything down for NSO, as some of the operations we'll discuss occurred a few years after this acquisition. There are claims that they faced some financial issues that demanded restructuring in 2022. If you look up NSO right now, it claims to have between 500 and 1,000 employees, an increase since then. And hey, they're hiring. A leaked 2014 brochure from NSO Group shows a kill chain framework tailored for BlackBerry devices. BlackBerrys were still very common back then as a smartphone of choice for public figures and security-minded individuals, and it certainly would have been a selling point. This leak is largely considered the most credible confirmation that Pegasus was on the market already until its 2016 uncovering by Toronto's Citizen Lab and Lookout Security. The spyware was uncovered when Citizen Lab was contacted by a human rights activist, Ahmed Mansour, from the UAE after receiving some suspicious text messages. Mansour, being no stranger to basic personal security practices, recognized that these were phishing messages, as they all had a URL included in them. The researchers were able to follow the links on a sandbox phone and captured what they could of the server information provided during the connection. What they found is that the server would send back code that utilized a zero-day exploit in the Safari browser, something that had been undetected and therefore unpatched by Apple. The exploit enabled a privilege escalation vulnerability and would allow the main part of the payload to be installed. The effect of the payload would allow the attacker to get an even lower level of access to the phone's data and operations than the user themselves. This would not only enable backdoor access to the user's information, it would allow the attacker to utilize the phone's applications, microphone, and camera at any time they wanted. This low-level access would mean that messages and data could be read before they could be encrypted, which circumvented end-to-end encryption from apps such as WhatsApp or Signal. The analysis of the phishing links also yielded a list of roughly 600 servers that the Citizen Lab and Lookout analysts could use for future reference. Pegasus has evolved in the years since, focusing largely on iPhone infrastructure, once again targeting the phone perceived to be more secure, focusing largely on developing zero-click exploits. This is exactly what it sounds like. NSO Group is developing cyber weapons that don't require you to interact with anything on their end to fall for the trap. You can simply be targeted. In 2021, Symantec Security brought attention to Pegasus' utilization of an exploit known as forced entry. Paraphrasing from Symantec, forced entry could target any iOS device utilizing Apple's iMessage. This vulnerability allowed attackers to compromise a device silently, only requiring the victim's Apple ID. The payload uses hidden iMessage fields and exploits vulnerabilities in the framework, including sending a maliciously crafted PDF to achieve arbitrary code execution. It's important to note that the execution of this exploit occurs entirely within the iMessage framework sandbox and is erased when the device restarts, making detection difficult. A more recent analysis by Reporters Without Borders and Amnesty International Security Lab shows that in August of last year, investigative journalist and anti-corruption reporter Anand Magnala was targeted in India, and that his device was attacked with the BlastPass exploit. According to the article, it sends up multiple PKPass exploit payloads to the victim's device, causing numerous HomeKit service crashes, leading to an attempt to install the Pegasus spyware. These payloads are sent as an SMS attachment and are followed by crashes in the home process of the Apple HomeKit service on the victim's device. These crashes generate multiple crash reports, indicating a systemic attempt to weaken the device's defenses before delivering the malicious payload. The attack vectors and payloads are meticulously designed to exploit zero-day vulnerabilities. They require no interaction from the victim and leave minimal forensic traces. So you get the picture. Pegasus is defended by its creators for helping governments target terrorists, gangs, and other dangerous organizations. One of the biggest victories that get touted by NSO Group is its involvement in the 2015 arrest of the famously not staying arrested Sinaloa cartel leader Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Mexico is one of the earliest known clients of the NSO Group, allegedly receiving services from them since 2012. However, while NSO Group pats themselves on the back for helping close the net on El Chapo, they've also been known for turning the software on some of the very journalists who reported on the Sinaloa cartel's activities and attempted to expose corruption within the Mexican government. In 2017, Javier Valdez Cardenas, an acclaimed crime reporter, was assassinated by unidentified gunmen, and his wife, fellow journalist Griselda Triana, was later found to have been targeted with Pegasus. Even as the government condemned the killing of her husband, Triana somehow ended up in their crosshairs. That same year, Ahmed Mansour, who had helped kickstart the Pegasus investigation, was detained in the UAE and eventually sentenced to 10 years in prison for his dissent. His only crime was a career of highlighting his own government's human rights abuses. Then in 2018 was the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, a progressive dissident from Saudi Arabia, most well known to Western audiences as a columnist for the Washington Post and Middle East Eye. Forensic analysis and leaked data suggest that the NSO Group's Pegasus spyware was used to target Khashoggi and his family both before and after his death. This includes attempts to monitor the campaign for justice led by Khashoggi's friends and associates, as well as the official Turkish inquiry into his murder. It was found that Hanan Eltar, Khashoggi's wife, was targeted with Pegasus spyware months before her husband's death. Forensic analysis indicated that a UAE government agency had installed the spyware on Eltar's phone. It was found that 2 Android devices owned by Eltar had shown that an unknown person had used one of the phones to visit a website that uploaded Pegasus onto the phone. I apologize, I'm just going to run through a few more examples, but I already feel like I'm not giving these the respect that they deserve. There are so many, and each one has been covered in substantial depth in other places. Keep in mind that almost all these people are journalists, human rights activists, human rights lawyers, and just people generally doing things with their lives that are essential to improving society. Each of these stories and each of these people deserves to be remembered as more than just a body count or a victim. And I find it hard to believe that any of this is happening without NSO Group's cooperation or knowledge. Just to cover a few more. So in 2019, there was Mati Monjib. Monjib was a Moroccan human rights defender, and he had been targeted repeatedly. So he sent his phone to Citizen Lab. Thankfully, some of the evidence he was able to provide shed some light on the network infrastructure and attack vectors for Citizen Lab. His submissions were considered essential for figuring out what servers were actually controlled by NSO Group and were being used for the Pegasus spyware, at least at the time. One of the more brazen uses of Pegasus was against the entirety of the Salvadoran news outlet El Faro. In 2020, 22 members of the website's newsroom were targeted with the spyware, mixed with a campaign of harassment by Salvadoran politicians and organized crime entities. And as I'm sure you can imagine if you've been following along this whole time, politicians and organized crime were two of the main things Alfaro's reputation was built on covering. In 2021, Peter Verlinden is a Belgian journalist. His iPhone was hacked, presumably by the Rwandan government. This one stands out a little bit because the investigation was actually conducted by Belgian military intelligence. The findings point to an actor within the Rwandan government because of Verlinden's extensive reporting in the country. The investigation revealed probable attacks on Verlinden and his wife's devices. The military intelligence claims were publicly verified by the security lab of Amnesty International. That same year, a digital forensic investigation by Ireland-based Frontline Defenders revealed the presence of Pegasus spyware on the phones of 6 Palestinian human rights activists. The investigation was confirmed independently by Citizen Lab and Amnesty International security labs. This one's pretty credible. While it wasn't possible to determine who deployed the spyware specifically, the Israeli government remains the #1 suspect. The hacked individuals all worked for NGOs designated as terrorist organizations by Israel's Minister of Defense. I'll leave off with a 2021 investigation started by a Paris-based prosecutor here. They're looking into allegations by French reporters claiming that they had been targeted with Pegasus spyware when they were doing research in Morocco. The prosecutor's probe later opened up investigations into 180 journalists around the world, possibly being targeted this way, journalists from outlets such as the AP and Reuters. It should come as no surprise that there have been a number of legal challenges to NSO Group because of the civil rights violations committed with Pegasus. In 2019, Amnesty International supported a legal action against the Israeli Ministry of Defense, aiming to revoke NSO Group's export license. This action was propelled by concerns over NSO's Pegasus spyware being used against human rights defenders globally. Amnesty, alongside about 30 other advocates and supporters, argued that the Ministry of Defense had endangered human rights by allowing NSO to export its products to governments known for egregious human rights abuses. The legal action was also supported by New York University's School of Law Bernstein Institute for Human Rights and Global Justice. In this case, Amnesty International highlighted a case where a staff member had been targeted by Pegasus. Shockingly, the Tel Aviv District Court rejected the case. In November of 2022, Alfaro's newsroom took action against NSO Group. The case, Dada versus NSO Group, was initiated by the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University on behalf of 18 of the employees. The suit claims that NSO Group's development and deployment of Pegasus spyware infringed upon U.S. laws, notably the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This legal action represented one of the most significant legal challenges against NSO Group. The grounds for prosecuting in a U.S. court was based on the argument that the deployment of the software had been proven to utilize U.S.-developed and U.S.-based equipment. However, on March 8th of this year, the district court granted NSO Group's motion to dismiss the case. Hey, this is Mark from the future, just scrambling to get this episode released. I just noticed that tonight, the staff have filed an appeal to see if the case can continue. Similarly, Hanan Eltar Khashoggi also brought a court case against the NSO Group that was dismissed for jurisdictional reasons. This case is also going through the appeals process. Now for some good news that comes with a bit of a double-edged sword. The first 2 cases that actually seem to be going well against the NSO Group. One comes from the Apple Corporation. Apple filed a lawsuit against NSO Group and Q Cyber Technologies in November 2021. With the stated aim of slowing the abuse of state-sponsored spyware. The lawsuit specifically focuses on NSO Group's use of Pegasus spyware against Apple users, detailing how NSO Group exploited the previously discussed forced entry vulnerability to infiltrate victims' devices by manipulating Apple's software and hardware architecture. Apple's lawsuit seeks to ban NSO Group from using any of its software, services, or devices, and it also seeks redress for NSO Group's violations of U.S. federal and state law. The lawsuit comes as Apple continues to invest in strengthening privacy and security protections for its devices. Pegasus is only one of several powerful tools now on the market for targeting Apple users. Apple has announced a $10 million contribution to support cyber surveillance researchers and advocates, and will notify users who have been targeted by forced entry. While I don't want to seem overly cynical of Apple's stated aims here, I just find it incredibly hard to be excited about the fact that the two most high-profile court cases that are making any movement against NSO Group are coming from two of the most powerful US corporations. I've already highlighted here some of the most well-documented court cases brought against these organizations by good people, on behalf of similarly good people. NGO lawyers and volunteers sticking their necks out for journalists and activists, with much of their work backed by incredible digital forensics. These cases have been brushed aside, dismissed, dropped, and forced into the appeals process, no matter how solid the evidence. And yet when the company that's arguably responsible for some of the biggest setbacks and labor conditions in modern history shows its teeth, the case is a go. NSO Group threw everything they had at the Apple case to move it to Israel, and was rightly denied. On October 29, 2019, in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California, WhatsApp initiated legal proceedings against NSO Group. The lawsuit alleges that NSO Group's spyware was deliberately used to compromise over 1,400 smartphones with the intent to monitor the communications of specific WhatsApp groups. As I understand Meta's claim, Jamal Khashoggi was one of the specific customers affected by this. Will Cathart, the CEO of WhatsApp, criticized NSO Group in a Washington Post op-ed published the same day the lawsuit was filed. It accused NSO Group of assisting in the persecution of over 100 journalists, activists, and human rights defenders around the world. He condemned the misuse of surveillance technologies that intrude into private life, and NSO Group's actions represent a significant threat to personal freedoms. Now, I'm not going to throw Cathcart in with the rest of Meta. He's certainly talking the talk here, but let's not forget that his parent company tried to do similarly subversive things, as we discussed earlier, though, and I have to emphasize this, to far less lethal ends. There's an argument for Meta having a body count too, but again, that's another story, and I wouldn't lay that on Cathcart. In his condemnation, he proposed a 4-point framework to enhance data privacy protections. Number 1, that tech companies should not be compelled to compromise their security mechanisms. Number 2, the importance of tech industry collaboration to uphold human rights and privacy. Point 3, he advised against cyber attacks among tech firms and the sale of technology to malicious actors. The first half is really rich considering the story from earlier, but I still support this on its face. And number 4, a global pause on the trade and use of spyware deemed dangerous. So now we get to the legally actionable accusations. NSO Group was accused of using WhatsApp's infrastructure to facilitate spear phishing tactics and using its networks to remotely install spyware. This allowed NSO's clients, including unauthorized governmental bodies under WhatsApp's own terms and conditions, to access and extract data from infected devices. WhatsApp contends that Pegasus could intercept communications across several messaging platforms, including WhatsApp itself. The filing alleges that NSO Group orchestrated the distribution of Pegasus through a centralized network that updated the malware on infected devices and facilitated data transmission between victims' devices and NSO clients. WhatsApp claims NSO Group reverse engineered its application to send its malicious code. So what they're saying here is that NSO Group reverse engineered WhatsApp itself to figure out some 0 days so that they could do overloads or injection attacks disguised as ordinary requests in WhatsApp. Also, they say that NSO Group did this using WhatsApp servers for subsequent data extraction. As a result, NSO Group and its clients could access information on these devices. WhatsApp claims that they were wronged under 4 legal frameworks: the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the California Comprehensive Computer Data Access and Fraud Act, breach of contract, and trespass to chattels. The meaning of that last one escapes me a little bit. When I look it up, it says it's an offense whereby the infringing party has intentionally interfered with another person's lawful possession of movable personal property. Took that one right from Wikipedia. WhatsApp claims that NSO's activities not only disrupted WhatsApp's service, but burdened its network and damaged its reputation and trust among users. In its defense against the lawsuit filed by WhatsApp or Meta, NSO Group argued that its Pegasus spyware is only sold to government agencies for the purpose of combating terrorism and serious crimes. NSO contends that it does not operate the spyware after sale, which is proven to be not true by Citizen Lab and some others, and is not involved in how governments choose to use it. The company also claimed that as a foreign company collaborating with state governments, it should be entitled to sovereign immunity, which protect it from lawsuits filed in U.S. courts. However, these arguments have been challenged effectively so far and have not been accepted by the U.S. courts, allowing the lawsuit to proceed. I think part of this is because Facebook and, to a lesser degree, Apple have aimed this more at how the behavior by NSO Group and the use of the Pegasus spyware has impacted specifically American citizens and products with American copyright. We'll see how this holds up. So far, though, there's been some really good news. After trying to get the case thrown out, trying to get the jurisdiction moved, trying to claim immunity and all that, there was a significant step forward. A federal judge in California ruled that NSO must disclose the Pegasus source code as part of the discovery process. There are some caveats here, though. The directive from Judge Phyllis Hamilton compels NSO Group to expose the code as it existed from 2019 through May 2020. First of all, I'm not happy about the fact that it's Meta that gets their hands on the source code, because we've seen what they've done with these things before, but also the fact that this will not be Pegasus or Phantom or whatever spyware NSO is hawking at the moment in its final form. But it's a huge start. There was another little ding to this as well, where in the discovery process, WhatsApp was not granted access to the clients, or at least not all of them, involved with NSO Group at this time. One other major thing that WhatsApp asked for that they were not granted was the specifics of the server infrastructure NSO Group uses. As I've said a few times, but I just want to make sure I'm crediting where credit is due. What we know about how the servers work at this point mostly comes from the Citizen Lab, Lookout, and Amnesty International investigations. Since this court order, NSO Group has not released any further statements. Just some reminders, but also additional notes on where NSO Group stands legally now after this. So the use of Pegasus and similar spyware obviously sparked controversy in Europe, where, especially since the rise of GDPR and setting the standard for data protection and privacy protection, there's been a lot of controversy about the presence of these sorts of spywares and NSO Group in general. There was a Luxembourg-based NSO Group affiliate, Group OSY Technologies, who were in Luxembourg until last year. And then, shocker, they moved just outside the EU to London. Since 2021, the NSO Group has technically been blacklisted from the US market. However, like I said, Westbridge Technologies was approached by the FBI, or depending on what you read, might have actually been paid by the FBI as recently as 2022. Despite NSO's claims that Pegasus is intended for anti-terrorism efforts, it's obvious that this string of reported abuses means you can't trust anything they say about how it's used. And while it's great that constitutional rights and GDPR and all these other structures we have in place do protect us to some degree, we need to remain vigilant, because the technology's there. It's clearly been there for the better part of 15 years, possibly longer. And democratic governments are clearly willing to use it, maybe with some loopholes, maybe with some rebranding, maybe with some specific permissions or needs for a warrant or something like that thrown on there. But the fact is, this stuff is out there, and we should continue to support organizations like Amnesty, like Citizen Lab, like Knight First Amendment, like all the other wonderful organizations that I've mentioned in this episode, and some that I probably completely forgot to. Just here where I'm at in the Netherlands, you've also got Privacy First and Bits of Freedom, who do similar advocacy for enhancing GDPR and user rights. On the other hand, we can't expect these organizations to come through and save us every single time. I really want to get a guest on here who's a true expert in privacy, so they can give us something a bit definitive to chew on. I'll do a longer piece on personal privacy in the future, and I imagine if you have the tech literacy to make it this far into the episode, you probably already know most of this. But strongly consider some free and relatively simple solutions, like a good antivirus, not McAfee, please. Oh God, not McAfee. full data encryption, end-to-end encrypted messaging, which is the default on the app's Signal. Learn how to encrypt your emails using PGP or an encrypted by default service. Use a password manager that doesn't have breaches every 3 months. Use a URL scanner when receiving anonymous communications. I'm a bit of a hypocrite with this, but also consider getting away from tech giant managed ecosystems. I'm trying to move away from the Google ecosystem to Proton, Mozilla, and DuckDuckGo, who, for various reasons and in different situations, are better. Also, for your desktop and laptop, look into VeraCrypt to do full drive encryption. Consider whatever phone device you have. Most of them at this point should have relatively easy to access full drive encryption options. If you're able to encrypt on that drive level, I believe you should be able to counteract a lot of the threats from spyware. You just have to check the details on that, because as good as, say, iOS's default encryption is, it's still, until the most recent releases, been proven to be hackable with Pegasus. Privacy is a game that I'm kind of late to the party on, but I am very fascinated by, and it really is kind of an all-of-the-above solution at this point, especially for lay people or people who, while they might be privacy-minded, still spend most of their time not focused on cybersecurity. People like journalists, people like workers in the IT field, things like that. It takes a lot of work to be nigh perfect, and you could still always screw it up. But it doesn't take a lot of work to get yourself to, say, 80%. And these are the things people really need to think about. Pegasus Spyware represents a profound threat to individual privacy and civil liberties. We have an urgent need for collective vigilance and protective measures in our digital lives. Pegasus is just one of several sophisticated tools that execute comprehensive invasions of our privacy. Its capabilities are not just a personal security concern, but resonate on a social level, challenging fundamental human rights and freedoms. The deployment of such spyware by state or private actors without consent fosters a surveillance state environment, potentially stifling political dissent, activism, and free expression due to fear of reprisal. Moreover, it contributes to the opaque data economy, where personal information is commodified and exploited, often without individuals' knowledge or consent. We need to update our legal frameworks and societal norms, and we need to take individual action and ownership of our own data in the best ways that we can. Hey, and a quick update. When I first recorded this episode, I spoke a little too soon about how this wasn't staying in the news. Just as I was going to release this, there were two more stories, one out of Jordan and Togo. There was evidence found in Jordan of extensive deployment of Pegasus spyware, once again targeting journalists and activists. 35 confirmed victims, including employees from Human Rights Watch. So here we have another country that is considered an ally of the US and Israel using, once again, Pegasus spyware on people who represent greater freedoms and human rights. In Togo, traces of Pegasus spyware detected on the phones of two journalists who were embroiled in a defamation lawsuit initiated by a government minister. It looks like this is an ongoing case, but the journalists experienced extensive surveillance that had been confirmed in the first half of 2021. And these two stories were released by Amnesty International. This next one is about how the former majority government in Poland, the Law and Justice or Peace Party, might have spied on 30 journalists there as well. On Friday, as in less than a week ago, Justice Minister Adam Bodnar, who is also Prosecutor General, said that later in the day, letters would be sent out to about 30 people to inform their phones had been hacked by Pegasus spyware. People will be notified that they have a status of witness in the probe conducted by a Mazovian Branch Department for Organized Crime. Bodnar said that in the first stage, the letters would be sent to a group of around 30 people of various professions, but the scale is obviously much larger. He also said that next week, he would present a report to Parliament on the use of operational control and Pegasus by special services within the Polish government. And then, Bodnar said, comprehensive numbers will be revealed on how often Pegasus was used in Poland. And again, I took that one from TVP World in Poland. Hey, thanks for listening. If you want to check out more of the work I'm doing with this project, you can go to virtualveritypod.com or themoloch.com. This should take you to the same place. Find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at MarkJBruno and It's Bruno, respectively. The Moloch blog should also be on Mastodon on the InfoSec Exchange. You can shoot me an email at contact@themoloch.com. All writing, editing, planning, and production is done by myself, Mark Bruno. All music is provided by Chris Delano.
Greetings, citizens of the world.
This is Virtual Verity.
We are anonymous.
It has cameras and sensors.
It's a podcast.
But it turns out someone else may have been watching too.
And just like your phones and social media apps.
And although it was a piece of malicious ransomware on the surface, the attack wasn't really about money.
We are Legion. We do not forgive.